More than 60 episodes of this podcast, So-Called Normal, have focused on the experiences and insights of those living with, coping with, and managing their own mental health. And some have identified their challenges as mental illness, but many more have framed their mental health in the context of just the messiness of life. In this special 4-part limited podcast series, you'll hear the remarkable story of Mark Hennick. We hear his own account of a suicide attempt at the age of 15. We hear the matter-of-fact story of his rescue. And we hear the personal story of an ordinary man who did the extraordinary. Here's your host, Mark Hennick.
My life, as I know it now, really didn't begin until I tried to end it. It was a cold, wet Cape Breton Sunday night, March 2003. This is the end, I thought. I was determined that it would be my end. I was in a state of focused, practiced determination. I had climbed over the railing of a bridge. I'd perched myself on an 1.5 inches of concrete on the wrong side in Sydney, Nova Scotia. I was fully prepared to launch myself out over the edge and to greet the ground below. I still, to this day, don't know how long I stood there. Time does funny things when you're distorted in your mind like this, but when I did let go, since there was practically nothing under my feet, I began to fall. I remember the ground coming toward me as I fell. And then I remember seeing the arm of a stranger. He was wearing a light brown jacket. As I looked down and saw the ground coming toward my face, I saw his arm wrap around my chest, and he pulled me backward against the railing so hard that it knocked the wind out of me and my feet flew up off of the edge. I dangled there for what seemed like forever, and then he pulled me back. I didn't know it then, but Mike Richey was my savior that night. Sure, he pulled me off of the edge of a bridge, he saved my life in that moment, but he actually ended up giving me my entire life from that moment. What brought Mike to the bridge that night? Just at the right time, when so many others, I heard them driving by behind me. So many others that didn't notice. Well, it turns out Mike was just beginning his career as a youth care worker in Nova Scotia. He didn't have any prior training on suicide intervention. But little did he know, he was about to get a crash course in managing a desperate teenager determined to kill himself. It was building a connection with Mike in that brief moment that seemed like forever that ended up saving me. Now, more than 15 years later, Mike and I finally sat down and recalled in detail that night on the bridge, but everything that brought us both to that point as well.
I was working at Sobeys, which was a grocery store, just in the produce department, and a guy that I worked with, his father worked for Children's Aid, so he was kind of my in to that, and I just said, is there any way that I could volunteer, do some work? And so I got kind of connected through him doing that, and that's when I started doing it was called the mentoring program. Mm-hmm. So I would go to the residential facility where the kids lived, and I had certain clients that I worked with that I would just kind of like take them out, just get them out of that kind of setting for a while, and just be a normal kid, let's go do some stuff, fun stuff together. Yeah.
What kind of things would you do with them?
Interesting. We would like I said, having no real experience with kids, I was really surprised at kind of the little things that you take for granted. So I would do things like my dad and I used to go fishing once in a while at Blackett's Lake. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. That's not too far. Yeah. So I would take them fishing. Even something as simple as I remember being at Blackett's Lake one day and just skipping a rock, and this one of my clients I'd say he was probably 14 or 15, but very kind of quote unquote tough presenting, would never show any sort of, I'm basically nothing that was traditionally would be thought of as being childlike he would ever want to have anything to do with, or he wouldn't show you that side of him. And I skipped a rock and he was fascinated. And then I showed him, he was, how did you do that? So I showed him, and we spent half an hour just skipping rocks until he could get it to skip. And I thought, this is the most simplistic, childlike thing. And it's just, but it's those little moments that kind of inspired me. I like being able to break through these barriers with kids that, otherwise have these walls up, and it was I've had quite a few in the beginning that kind of inspired me to keep going in that direction. Mm. So,
how many clients did you have in that capacity as a mentor?
At the time, I only did that for probably about a year. So I had 3 or 4 that would, I would just kind of go and take out on a regular basis. Yeah. One that I had really made a close connection with, that I had kind of stayed connected with over the years, right into his 20s.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So I did that. And then the center itself had said, they were looking, I guess, for a casual employee. And so we have an opening coming up. The kids seem to enjoy going with you, and blah, blah, blah. I didn't have a background in youth care work at all or anything, but they said, we'd love to have you. So then I went home and I'm thinking, this job is kind of being offered.
Right.
I didn't know anything about the job itself.
And which in Cape Breton, that doesn't happen all the time.
No, that was another thing where I was like, it's very rare that someone is saying, here's a job, are you interested? Yeah, so basically I took the job there, and I figured, I could always go back to school later, just see if I like this, see what it's all about.
Yeah.
So
what were the objectives of those kinds of programs? So you have kids. How many kids or youth lived in that facility?
In that facility, I don't. It's been so many years now. I want to say 5 or 6. I can't remember
so
offhand.
Quite small.
Yeah, it wasn't a huge thing, and that's what generally most facilities. It's just becomes kind of counterproductive to what you're trying to do, which is create a stabilized environment. So if you have too many kids, then it's really hard to manage because there's too many different personalities and that sort of thing. So
I think I'm interested in that, because I'm interested in what that pretty much first clinical kind of environment was like for you going in, and you were doing the mentoring thing, and you had the psychology degree, the bachelor's degree, but that's really, going to school isn't anything like actually getting in the field.
Not at all. No. And interestingly enough, I was younger and eager, and very eager to get involved because I was excited about it. It was something that I didn't know anything about. I was seeing these, as I said, those little moments that I found really personally rewarding, and I'm like, this is something I never would have thought about doing, but it was gratifying. So I was like, how far can I take this? Yeah. So my big thing was getting that experience piece, as you're saying, how did I adapt into that world? And unfortunately, being a casual, I was doing that mentoring program where I was always taking the kids and just doing things throughout the day. However, when I got hired there as a casual, most of the casuals get the shifts that people don't want.
Right, sure.
And in that case, it was a lot of 12 to 8s. So it was 12 to 8, 8 to 4, 4 to 12 was kind of the 3 shifts. And I was working all 12 to 8. So I would
12
12 a.m.
12 a.m. Oh, so you're going to work at midnight.
At midnight.
Wow.
Which kind of intersects with our meeting later.
Sure, sure. We'll get to that.
Yeah. So the thing that I was really excited to start this job, but I wasn't seeing the kids. I was going in there, and I mean, yes, I'd get the odd day shift, but for the most part, I was spending my time there all night long, just kind of being present. And the odd time a kid would get up early, and I'm there, and then maybe for an hour I see him and I leave.
What did you notice, if any, or did you notice, I guess, any commonalities when you did encounter either in the mentoring role or working for the brief times they actually did get to see the kids in the facility? What kind of commonalities did you notice between them? Sure, they all had different needs, but did they share things?
Yes, I would say the biggest thing is that underneath they're all kids.
Right.
So they all have very, very different kind of tough exteriors that it's very warranted given their histories. Some of the things are absolutely horrific that they've gone through. So it makes sense why they have this hard shell, because that's what they've had to learn. Like the walls they have to put up just to get through.
All boys too, were they? Or?
Well, I worked with the boys, but there was a female facility as well.
Okay, because that's a very it's not even a small town thing. Of course, it's everywhere. That sense of toxic masculinity that you got to suck it up and be a man.
And it's amplified, 10 times in that little world because you have to be tough.
Right.
And it's kind of, it is a little bit sad sometimes when you see, through no fault of their own, like a youth come in to a program who is maybe has suffered a lot of neglect or abuse, and then they're kind of thrown in with more seasoned kids that have lived in this world and had to learn the hard way how to adapt.
Right.
And they're visibly vulnerable. They're nervous. They're scared. They're also very. They can be very polite, well-mannered, and basically somewhat like stable in terms of what you'd expect for a young person to live in a very unstable environment.
Right.
But then the kind of that world itself is very harsh and unforgiving, so they have to learn really fast. So they will pick up a lot of bad habits really fast. So
From other kids
from
in
other
the
kids in the
environment,
environment. Yeah. And that's just the nature of that world of group care. It's nothing that it's been that way since I'd started, and we do our best just to manage it. But that's one of the harder things, is because our goal is usually always to stabilize youth and make sure and give them the best and safest environment that we possibly can.
So it was while you're working there that we meet. How long were you working at that facility when we encountered one another?
I want to say over a year. It's like I'm horrible with times, but I would say over a year at that point. And I, as I said, I worked a lot of 12 to 8, 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. So it took me about 20 minutes to get there. So I'm assuming it was 11:30-ish that I had been leaving for work. And along the way, there's an overpass. So I was going to work, driving over the overpass. And at that time, I mean, anything after 10 p.m. in Sydney, there's not much going on. So it's very...
10 p.m. is generous.
Very, yes, it was very quiet.
It was a Sunday night, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're both learning from each other. Every time I hear you talk about this, I learn more about it as well. And just over the last, I guess for context, 18 months or so 2 years or so that I've been writing my book, I was able to pull a lot of the records. So I didn't previously know that it was a Sunday night in March.
Okay, interesting.
In March. And now I know that.
I would have never known.
I do remember that there was snow still on the ground. And I try to explain to people, weirdly specific things stand out when you're in a mental health crisis. Like, I think it's just because you focus so intently on so few things, everything else tries to fade away to make the moment make sense, I guess. So whatever your attention happens to fall on, mine, for whatever reason, were little things like the snow or the railing of the bridge that I had climbed over, which is when you're driving to work, where you found me.
Yeah. As I'm driving by, I mean, you stood out. I see it seems to be a young person. I couldn't tell how old you were at the time because I could see your back. On the opposite side of the railing, kind of with your hands just holding on, leaning forward a little bit. And as I was driving by, I'm like, that's not a good scene. So,
but you say it's obvious, but I remember standing on the other side of the railing. It's only about because I went back and looked years later, and it's only an inch and a half of concrete on the other side of the railing. It's not very much. And I remember only my heels were on the concrete because there wasn't enough room for any of the rest of my foot. I remember that there were lots of other people who had driven by because I could hear them. And that's another one of those things that that my focus picked up on, I guess, or my pathological focus picked up on, was that there are these section connectors on the overpass, these, I guess, iron or steel things that connect the sections of the bridge together. And one of my earliest childhood memories, and this is one of those things too, where I'm not sure if it's my actual memory for the moment or just a childhood memory getting applied to it, but when you drive over the overpass, bum, bum. You hear bump bump when you drive over those section connectors. So I could swear still to this day that standing on the other side of the railing, I heard many, many times bump 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 as cars passed by behind me. So I don't think it was obvious actually to everybody, but for whatever reason,
it's interesting though. Yeah,
you looked. So what was your reaction like when you're just going to work, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, as soon as it was clear that if someone was just kind of stopping to have a look over the railing or just take in the evening, it wouldn't have looked like that.
So you immediately knew what it was.
It didn't. Yeah, it wasn't something I could just keep driving.
Right.
So the first thing I thought was, I need to make sure that like police are aware of this, or someone that's trained in actual like, you know, possibly suicide intervention training.
And you hadn't had any training?
I didn't have any of that
Right.
at the time.
Had you done any suicide interventions to that point?
No, I
Really?
did not. No. As I said, I pretty much went with from like taking the kids out and having fun with them at my job,
Skipping rocks across the lake.
and doing that kind of very light work.
Sorry about that. Kind of interrupted your life there, didn't I?
So yeah, I there was a little convenience store at the end of the overpass, and I just ran in and said, it seems like there's someone that might be thinking about jumping off the overpass. Could you please call the police? And then I jumped in my car and went back.
Do you remember, because it's probably just, I assume, some kid or something working it's a gas station, I think, right there. The first one on the right?
I feel like it was, I don't know if you say the name of it, but it might have been Ken Don's Convenience, I think.
Jeez, that's a throwback. Yeah, no, I don't think that's a chain anyway.
No,
but,
yeah.
whichever one it was. But so did you get a chance to see how that person reacted? Did they?
They just picked up the phone, and I didn't wait to listen to them talk.
Sure.
They picked up the phone, and I just got back in the car and went straight back.
What were you feeling in that moment? Were you calm? Were you
surprisingly calm? Like, I just felt like this is what needs to be done. Like, I'm just following the steps of like, this is all I can do.
Right.
You know, so there wasn't time to really think about it. I wasn't overly analyzing the situation. It was just, okay, what do I do?
You just act.
And I just did
Yeah.
it.
I don't remember you arriving. The first thing I remembered was you coming up behind me, and I couldn't see you because I was holding on the railing, like you mentioned, and I couldn't turn back around because part of the whole point of being there was that I didn't. I say this in my talks all the time too. I didn't want to fall by accident. That was never the point. When I climbed up over the railing and got back down the other side to stand on the edge, I held the telephone pole to guide myself back down. It made sense in my mind at the time because I didn't want to slip. I didn't want to have an accident, right? That wasn't the point. I wanted control over something. So I remember I couldn't turn around to see you, but I remember hearing, I think you say, I might have just described this later, but you don't look like you're doing so good.
It was something along those lines. Because I, like, as I said, I didn't have any sort of like.
Yeah. What do you say to a kid on the other side of a bridge?
Yeah. So that was the first kind of thing, was just talk to you like I would, you know, like, things don't look great. What, you know, like, you know.
Well, it turns out you were right.
Yeah.
Things weren't so good. And I definitely didn't hear your car or anything like that arrive. Did you? I assume you introduced yourself. Did you? Or
I believe, I can't remember.
Right.
Now,
I don't actually either.
Yeah, I think more so that was maybe a little bit later on.
Okay.
Because at first it's not about me. Like, hey, I didn't
Sure.
think of it that way. And even I think there was a conscious way that I had kind of approached you with. I didn't ask you like, what's wrong? Or like, that's not my place to like. So the whole thinking of back at it now and kind of looking at like analyzing it a little differently. Even that. I know that that's the way I would have approached it in any scenario with someone that was in a situation of distress. It's not like, tell me what's wrong. Like,
right. So if you had your time back, you'd pretty much do it the same way.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, it worked out, right?
Yeah.
It worked out. So how did I react to you when you came up behind me and said that?
I didn't know if you were going to panic or be kind of jittery, like, get away from here. Like, you're just quiet. You're very quiet. And that kind of calm, quiet demeanor was more, I couldn't get a read on what you were thinking or what. There was a lot of kind of open space with in terms of just like verbally. So I didn't want to push you. I didn't want to try to just keep talking at you. But for you to know that I was there and that I'm not going anywhere, so I'm going to be here. So just to keep, like, I wanted to almost make, now I use terminology like contracts. I just want to like,
Which for the listeners, that's contracting for safety, getting me to try to say that I'm not going to kill myself, even though I'm standing on an inch and a half of concrete.
If I move a foot closer, can I have your, that sort of thing. So I don't.
Interesting. So normally I think when people think of safety contracts, it's, you know, when you leave here today in the sense of a clinical context, can you promise me? Yeah. But actually, you collapsed it down even quite a bit further into, if I take one more step forward, can you be safe?
Yeah.
If I ask you, that's interesting.
Yeah. And once again, like, it seemed at the time was common sense, I guess, but that is technically how you would go about that.
Sure.
Formally. But yeah, so I didn't want to rush you or anything, and just, as I said, let you know that I'm there. But also, I wanted to get physically closer to you just so that I could hear you and because you were, as I said, very quiet. Didn't offer much. So, and it's not a situation where I wanted to be too pushy or anything. So, very tactful. Every moment was kind of thought, okay, before I do this, I need to make sure that I'm not pressuring him in any way. Or
how long were the silences that you were waiting? Because I wasn't talking much.
Felt like forever.
Sure.
So in that sense, I sometimes maybe a couple of minutes. But yeah, at the time in that situation, it felt like half an hour sometimes between just even getting a response.
And what was my body language like in that time? I mean, I remember holding on to the railing, but
focused, looking down like that. You didn't turn your head. You didn't look at me. You weren't moving around a lot. You were just holding on and kind of staring forward and down. Until I got closer, I didn't even really know what you looked like. You had this person coming next to you and trying to talk to you, but you didn't even, as far as I remember, even turn your head to look at me. It's like you weren't interested in me at all.
To be honest, I didn't realize until much, much later, but I wasn't even sure entirely. And I think this is true in the moment as well. But I wasn't even sure later if you were real.
You mentioned that,
right? Yeah, because I was in such a distorted place in my head, I think, that I had learned over and over again to be mistrustful of my thoughts and my feelings. And I had experienced auditory hallucinations before, in a much more limited sense, I think, than people who are really plagued by that. But I don't know, maybe that's part of it. But also, I liken the hyper focus of being in that place to that everything, you just don't hear it. I don't hear other things, breaking through, that you're so dissociated, I guess, in that moment. I don't know. So I think that's where it was. Partly, it's also, and I've said this before too, it's gone now, but there was a chain link fence going along a road that cut underneath the bridge at that time. And rather than being super hyper emotional, like you in some ways, I was very clear in my thinking, I thought, in that narrow place, in that I was trying to calculate how far out I would need to jump so I didn't land on the fence. Right? It all made perfect sense to me in my head at the time. Yeah. And I was completely separated from the emotion of it. It was like I had deadened that part of myself.
Even to that, right down to that last, potential moment in your mind, you're going to control it right.
Absolutely. Because everything else felt like it was out of control. I felt like everybody had done everything to me at that point. And what you had no way of knowing up until that point, although, I don't know, maybe you guessed, I had been in and out of hospital by that point 6 or 7 times, I think, 6 times. So this wasn't my first rodeo, right? Yeah. I don't think that most people just end up at that place out of nowhere. Maybe for some people that's the case, but that certainly wasn't the case for me. It was a long road to get to that bridge. Do you remember when if I did start to talk to you at all, what I was saying as I trying to respond to you?
There's the one thing that kind of stuck in my head because you didn't offer very much, and it took a lot to get you to say anything. But after some time, and after I was a little bit closer, and I felt like I had established a little bit of trust with you, that I'm just here to talk to you. And as far as I remember, you had said I tried quite a few times. Sure. I tried, and that seemed to be what you kept coming back to. So I would try to get a little bit more from you just to have some context. But that seemed to be your focus, was just, I've tried, I can't, I tried, and that was it.
I mean, I think I was 15 at the time, and I had first started struggling with depression as early as about 9 or 10 years old. I was diagnosed at 12. So I felt like for a third of my life, at least, probably a lot longer actually, because usually it's going on for a lot longer than the diagnosis actually, before the diagnosis comes in. I felt like I had tried everything, that all these smart people, all these, healthcare providers and psychiatrists and psychologists and all these other people couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And we were raised a Cape Breton form of Irish Catholic, so I had heard more than once, maybe this is just your cross to bear.
Yeah,
well, I don't want to bear this cross.
Oh, that old chestnut.
Right? Yeah. So it's like I felt like I had tried, and that was it, and I couldn't do it anymore. And I think that's where that came from. It just felt completely hopeless, and those are the hopelessness and helplessness are two of the key features that suicidal people exhibit all the time. So you. How close were you to me at that point? If I had let go, would you have been able to catch me?
I might have been able to lunge forward enough. I wasn't directly behind you or anything like that. Right. I was close enough to be able to see your feet, and that was kind of like looking over the edge was, I don't like heights.
Yeah, sure.
And just being on my end of it was scary. So thinking of you with your heels, as you said, on the other side, you could have just slipped, even if you didn't.
Which is how a lot of suicides, completed suicides, happen that way, through accident during an attempt. Yeah. I went back last summer or the summer before, I think. Anyway, at some point, because you mentioned this, not me, how I like to know the details about these things. I think it's important to do the research.
I would be the same. Yeah.
Well, and especially for the book, and I want to be as accurate as possible. There's the emotional truth of it. Yes, whether or not somebody else's truth was the same as mine, that's irrelevant. But there's also some factual things I'd like to know. And one of them was, well, how high up actually was I? And I went back and I got one of those little digital, I went to Canadian Tire and got one of those little digital measurement things. I'm standing under the overpass trying to get right down to the ground. This is how weirdly specific I am. Trying to measure exactly where I was, because I remember exactly where I was now. And it was about 35 feet, I think, or something like that. I followed that up by doing a bit more research, which I now know that there's only a 50-50 chance I actually would have died from that fall. It's much more I shouldn't say much more likely. There's a half the chance that I would have been disabled or maimed in some way by the fall. I didn't know that at the time, of course. That's not what I was thinking. I was thinking of...
And I'm sure at the time that could have been 200 feet,
It could have, yeah. Well, this is it, because especially as a little kid, right, who... Everything looks big when you're small.
Yeah.
And when you feel small, everything feels big, right? Yeah. So, I brought my mother back there years later, too, after we connected, but before we met. And she had a similar reaction. I brought her right to the very spot, and she was also afraid of heights. And that was one of those moments where I feel like she really got it, to see it, in your words, I think, from your letter eventually that you sent me, and we'll get to that too, to see it from my perspective. Right? Not just your own. Why was that important to you, to see it from, or why would you even do that? To come up next to me and I don't know.
Like literally, why did I?
Well, literally, yes, but why would that be your motivation? Why wouldn't you just run up and grab me? Like, why?
That's way too invasive. I feel like it would just be kind of. I don't even know how to describe it. I can't even think of doing that, to be honest.
Right.
It's just not how I would approach a situation like that.
You've also previously said that how afraid you were in that instance. What were you afraid of?
I wasn't afraid in terms of me falling or anything, because I'm safely on the other side of the railing. And
it's a high, like it's a chest height.
It is, yeah.
Railing.
Yeah. So in that sense, it wasn't like a personal safety thing or anything like that.
Right.
I was more so concerned for your safety and seeing this, young person fall. And at the time, depending on, as you said, maybe 50-50, but depending on how you fell, it could have been the bad 50%,
Well, and I was being, as you saw, extremely calculating in how I did this. It was all about the plan for me at that point, that I have to jump in exactly this way in order to, that for me was, because I had been through it so many times, I felt like a failure. When, of course, if somebody doesn't go through with a suicide attempt, to me now, that's not a failure. That's a success. That's a good thing that they didn't die by suicide, right? Yeah. That's not how I felt at the time, though. So eventually you get close to me, and I liken the, whether, I don't know if it's stalling or if it's breaking down or dissolving the barrier that keeps people stuck in that place. But eventually, I became conscious enough to realize that the police had arrived. I still, to this day, and I've done a lot of memory work, do not remember cops arriving, but there were a lot of them that came.
Both sides of the bridge.
Both sides, at least 2 or 3 cars on either side. So tell me that moment. When did that happen? You're up there, the cops are coming, you're already in the situation. So what was that like?
I was hoping that where I had, it seemed like it took a while for me to establish any sort of connection with you, and I felt like that we had got at least to the point where you would acknowledge me, and we had established a very light rapport, and I felt like I was more concerned with, I didn't want police to come in and just bust in and say, all right, you've done your part, see ya, and then ruin everything that we had just worked towards.
Well, and actually here, there's some people that are afraid, many people who are afraid to call the cops if somebody is suicidal, because it can go the other way real quick sometimes.
When they did arrive, they kept their distance as well. They didn't crowd the area or anything.
And did you establish some way to communicate with them to do that, or they just kind of...
There was a female officer that was walking towards on the other side of where I was standing, and I just kind of made eye contact with her, and she kept her distance as well, and I continued to talk to you, and she kind of continued to get a little closer to you as well as we talked. So she was present as well. To this day, I have no idea who it was.
I never, and it wasn't until, it was in 2015 that no, it wasn't that long ago. Well, yeah, no, it must have been 2015 or 2014.
I am the worst with...
Anyway, I'm trying to remember when we actually reconnected much later, but whenever it was, I had no idea until that moment that there was somebody else even there. And you're mentioning this female police officer who came up as well.
Yep.
So however it happened, she kind of got the idea to let you continue.
Yeah, and I was like glad, but I was also surprised because once again, like I don't have any training in this, so you always would think that I'll leave it to professionals. Or like,
right. When chances are that cop might not have had any training either.
Yeah.
Many don't.
Yeah.
Although they're often the first people who get to scenes like this,
for
too.
sure. Yeah.
Most of the time, I think.
Maintaining that contact with you was my priority at the time. So I just continued to talk until I got close enough to you to be able to maybe like arm's length.
Now, I remember, and I think I saw it when I looked to either side. I still couldn't see any people, but that I saw the lights on the cop cars, and that they had set up barricades. Was that the case?
I believe, yeah.
Yeah, I think, because that's in my memory, but they might have just barricaded with their cars. But I thought I remembered that they had set up sawhorse barricades on either side of the bridge, and that I don't know how big they actually were, but in my memory, and I still see it, the crowds had
there was people behind the barricades. I think that's why they set them up. Yeah.
Now, I've my explanatory model of this in my mind is that people on Cape Breton Island like to listen to the police scanner.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
To see if there's any, even if it's late, midnight on a Sunday night in March.
Yeah.
There's some action.
You could
happening,
miss something,
right? You could miss something. So this is how else would they know to come out? Like it's boggles my mind. But so this the cop cars are there. They're barricaded. There's crowds now. As that, I guess, dissociation or barrier or whatever it is dissolving for me, I'm starting to become more aware of this stuff where I wasn't before. I was completely hyper focused on what I was going to do. That's when things seemed to actually, maybe it was in my benefit. Maybe it was a protection that I was so hyper focused in that moment, because the wheels started to fall off, I guess, a bit as I started to get more agitated.
And like the strange thing too is that it wasn't until years later when I had heard your talk, and you talked about this other person, that was kind of telling you to just jump.
Yeah,
just do it.
Again, that's another one of those things, and I'm not 100% certain if it was only in my head. Like I didn't even know if you were only in my head or not. But I can swear too that there was somebody on the sidelines at the barricades. There was a group of young men, at least 3 of them, possibly more, and I could hear them laughing. And I remember thinking that they must be drunk. That was my thought at the time. So that's what convinces me that it was real. Because why would I think that if they weren't, if it was just a hallucination or something? And then one of them shouted out to me, I could swear, he shouted out to me to jump, and he called me a coward. And that was the moment for me that things changed, that you were there helping to relax, I guess, that certainty, to introduce some more ambiguity to me. You were building connection, even if I wasn't responding very well. Mm-hmm. But it was like that guy on the sidelines just reminded me of why I didn't want to be on that side of the railing anymore.
and I didn't pick up on that as a trigger for you to kind of like think this is the next step of what I'm going to do.
Right.
You could hear people talking all around, and as you said, there's people laughing. I mean, it's just horrible. But what I purposely did was I tuned the sounds of the crowd and those people out. I didn't want to, my focus was just on you. So I didn't really honestly know what anyone was saying. I didn't want to hear what anyone was saying. That was irrelevant. So
how big were the crowds, would you say, if in your memory, how many people do you think were there?
On each side, just in terms of just pedestrians, not police or paramedics or anything, maybe 15, 20 on each side, roughly. And
in Sydney, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a good crowd.
Good crowd. We'll be here all week. Well, actually, fewer people come out for some performances sometimes. Wow, that's wild. And so then all the cops, I assume, are out of their cars and milling around and stuff too,
yeah,
right?
And that might have added to kind of my perception of the density of the crowd, because I'm not paying much attention, but glancing over between pedestrians and first responders and things, it looked maybe like more people, but it was a fair amount of people on both sides.
Yeah. In my memory, I hear that guy shouting for me to jump. He calls me a coward. I let go of the railing. And I mean, there's an inch and a half of concrete under my heels. I start to fall pretty much right away. You're there standing right next to me, watching me pretty intensely. What was that like for you?
I just kept watching your hands when I was close enough to you to be able to physically grab you if I needed to. I almost felt like we were there for a very long time, that you were going to do something eventually, and you weren't giving me enough to make me feel like you were going to say, all right, I'm going to climb back over.
Yeah, oops, changed my mind.
Yeah. And it just things seemed to be building in a way that I just didn't have a good feeling about how they were going to go. So at that point, I just kept watching your hands, and I'm like, if he lets go, I'm just going to grab him. I would never just grab you unexpectedly or anything, but I could see you had your hands were kind of like cupped around the back, because the top of the railing is round, and you started to kind of like let them slip a little bit more around the railing, and at that point, as your hand slipped and you just kind of I don't know, but I had the feeling that you knew that I was close enough to grab you at that point. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it wasn't until I was that close that you let go. But when you did, I put my arm around the front of you and grabbed the back of your jacket. And when I had you in that position, the other police officer ran over, and we both, she helped me pull you back over the railing.
With that act of kindness, that act of very simple humanity, of just getting to know me, building that connection with me, and most importantly, I think, allowing space for me to be silent, not pushing me with his judgment or with his words, with his stigma, just letting me be. That's what let my life begin again. It wasn't suddenly everything was better. He didn't cure me when he pulled me off that bridge, but he gave me another chance. He gave me a role model for the rest of my life that he wouldn't know until much, much later. Because it wasn't until more than a dozen years it had bubbled up inside me to find this man, this stranger who I didn't even know was real. All I knew was that he was wearing a light brown jacket that night. I didn't remember his name, I didn't remember his face. So in our next episode, where did Mike Richey go after he saved my life, after he pulled me to safety from the edge of that bridge? I'm Mark Hennick. This is So-Called Normal.
You've been listening to a special episode of So-Called Normal with Mark Hennick. If you like what you heard, share the episode with others. You can always follow Mark on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram at Mark Hennick. Otherwise, you might want to check out his website, markhennick.com. This special series of So-Called Normal has been produced by Mark Hennick and Eye Contact Productions. I'm Dave Trafford.